So Callum sent me a set of questions from Michael Zagai, student who wanted to have some answers for his media project or something. Honestly, I can't remember exactly what the context was, but I will answer them anyway, and hopefully they're useful. One, do you think we're in a culture war, and what do you see as the conclusion if so? I think society is always a culture war between different factions with different values, and the conclusion, I guess, is kind of Hegelian, where the values conflict. I was maybe on a smaller scale than Hegel envisaged, I would say. But I mean, the values conflict, the people have a discussion, or like they have an interaction, and they take away from one another a certain way impression, a certain way of feeling about how the thing went. And I think that people change over time depending on the nature of these reactions, and this is how like new cultures are formed. So yeah, there isn't really a conclusion to a culture war. There's just change. Two, what do you think the source of said culture war is? Like when Tim Pool says you won't show up with a mob if you did and wanted revenge against the person who really started it, who would you point the finger at? There is no one who really starts it. It's a set of values. Culture wars are based on conflicting sets of values, and these values change over time in order to accommodate one another, or it leads to war. It's obviously better to have these values change through social means rather than violent ones. Three, you state how people are responsible for their own actions like the N-word stuff, and black people's reaction to that word is on them. How do you believe this while also stating the far left is responsible for the people voting more and more anti-progressive things like Brexit, Trump, and slowly Bolsonaro, with potentially worse in the future? This isn't the personal responsibility of someone's reaction to a word or anything is on them, but I'm not suggesting. I'm not saying that the left is personally responsible for people choosing to vote against their policies, but the left is causing this by driving policies from their wing of politics into a balmy direction. Obviously, the people who are choosing to vote for something else are responsible for voting for something else. They're the ones who bear responsibility for that. But the reason that they're doing it is because of the things that the left is doing. I mean, look at the recent proposed legislation and debate on, was it third trimester abortion or something, which is right up until the point of birth. I mean, that's disgusting. That's a really disgusting thing. And the further this goes, the more people are going to radically vote in the opposite direction. Now, I'm not saying that the left is personally, leftists are personally responsible for people voting in a different way. That is, of course, on them. But the reason that these people are choosing to do that is because of what the left is doing. I hope that's clear. What for? One of the most important culture wars with a lasting effect is the American Revolution. Knowing all we and you do now, where would you have stood, and would you have preferred to have ended up on the American side or try to reform the British side rather than build like on the American side? I mean, the American Revolution obviously was a conflict of values, and I mean, it was obviously remarkably important, and it did lead to open warfare. I undoubtedly, ideologically, I would have fallen on the Republican side because there's no particular justification for monarchy. Thomas Paine did an amazing job of just stripping it down and saying, look, this is ridiculous. And so, I mean, he's right. It is ridiculous. But the thing is, it's a product of our inferior past. It's before we had the sort of moral technology that we have developed now, and I guess political technology to understand how politics can work. I don't think that the reform that they're thinking of would have been possible. The reform that Michael's thinking of would have been possible without cataclysmic events like the American Revolution. I mean, you've got to have it demonstrated to you in very blunt terms that the way that you're perpetuating, the sort of system of cultural values you're perpetuating has serious internal problems and is unacceptable for a large number of people to the point where they're going to fight you over it. That's the sort of, unfortunately, the sort of time when these cultures tend to start becoming more malleable. Well, actually, that's not true. I don't even know if they do start becoming more malleable. I think at that point they probably become more inflexible and dogmatic. But the sensible thing to do would be to soften a little and listen to the other people. 5. How would you say you define culture? Which one is superior? And is multiculturalism in any form sustainable or possible? Culture is the collective product of social interactions and the character that they have. This is why we can describe cultures as being different. And they're not all the same, they're not all equal. Which one is superior is dependent on your own personal set of values. If you value war, then you probably won't find a peace-loving liberal civilization to be the superior civilization. I mean, it's probably going to have less war involved in its day-to-day activity than, I don't know, a jihadi ISIS camp or something, It depends on which is your own set of values. I mean, now, I would suggest that there are empirical empirical values that you can measure, that you can determine in a material sense, which is superior, like longevity, health, education, things like this, access to food, But the thing is, if you don't think that if you don't think the human being has innate value, then you won't really care so much about that. What you might care about is, again, if you're an Islamist, what you're concerned with is that God exists. He created the Quran through the mouthpiece of the Prophet Muhammad, and he, in it, lays out a divine order that the world should be run by. And if the world is not run by this divine order, then that is demonstrably inferior to a world run according to the divine order. So you will naturally do what you can to try and set the world at rights with what you believe to be God's mandate. So you'll find Islamic culture far superior to Western culture, even, by any sort of metric that we have, it won't be. But is multiculturalism in any form sustainable or possible? I mean, it's possible, but I don't know how sustainable it is. The problem with multiculturalism is that it pits groups and cultures against one another, and I've used this term before, but it sort of turns them into armed camps that become wary of one another, and I don't think that is going to lead to anything other than violence. So, I mean, it's possible to do, but I don't know how long it'll last. Personally, I think that we shouldn't be trying for multiculturalism. We should actually be trying for monoculturalism, which is what most nations are. They have like a mainstream monoculture that overarches the entire society, and then subcultures are kind of branches out of that. So they fit naturally within the society because of generations of previous interactions between people who differ, and even if they have different values, they've come to a compromise or an arrangement in some way, an understanding between one another. To have a society with a bunch of people with just wildly conflicting values that they never end up resolving, I think is definitely untenable. 6. Do you see any redemption or hope for our institutions like colleges, or do you believe, like many Jordan Peterson, Peter Boghossian, and the tech dude on the V livestream confirm, they believe the institutions in Western culture largely have been subverted and co-opted and must be allowed to die so we can rebuild them from the ashes? An institution is the sum of its components, and that means the people who make it up. If the people who make up an institution are radical leftists, just communists, then the institution will be a communist institution. It will have that characteristic. The culture of it will be communist, and you'll get a result that you would expect from that. I don't think any of the institutions are beyond redemption or beyond hope. I think that there's always hope and there's always redemption, and these things can always change. I just don't see that they will, because it seems like no one's prepared to deal with the communist in the room. And, I mean, I don't know that they won't die. I think that universities like Mizzou that are dying because of the communist infestation in them, well, let the market decide. It's not up to me to destroy a university, but if the university dies because of the people running it, mismanage it and run it into the ground, then okay. And I'm not going to weep for an institution that gets subverted by Marxists. So, what are your thoughts? 7. What are your thoughts on how people and stats show that Gen Z, born 1998 or later, including me, are much more conservative than we have seen in a long time? Some argue classical liberal principles Some argue slippery slope, like gays must be repressed. I'm not sure what you're asking me there. Just like, what do you think the effects of this will be? Will they be largely positive or negative? I'm not sure that Generation Z is a lot more conservative than the progressives. I saw, I actually can't remember where I saw this, but I saw, I think it was a Pew. No, it was Pew. Yeah, Pew released their polling data on Generation Z, and they're not as based and red-pilled as one might think. They've internalized a lot of progressive values and mores. I honestly don't think they're as conservative as people think, but there's always the spark of rebellion in people who are being told what they must and must not do. So hopefully some classical liberal principles can shine out. I don't know what you mean about slippery slope and gays must be repressed. I obviously don't think gays should be repressed. But I think that it would be positive for Generation Z to start discovering sort of like the real reason that we ended up calling ourselves free. 8. Seeing things like Macron with France and the violent communist and anti-fire establishment, Brexit and Trump, and now punishing of what is arguably our side by using their non-violent tactics, like Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals that you like, against them, calling them Nazi and stuff. This is like calling Anna Soubry a Nazi and using their own tactics against them, right? Okay. Do you have renewed respect for the Second Amendment and regret that the European populace is largely but not completely unarmed? No, it doesn't. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with this. This is something that Americans seem to think that the only people in the world with guns. There's something like 500,000 legally owned firearms in the UK. It's not that we don't have guns. It's we don't have a particularly big gun culture. And honestly, in France, it's probably a good thing they don't have a particularly big gun culture, because it's been really, really goddamn violent. A protester with the yellow vest the other day lost his hand. So, I mean, it's bad over there. Thankfully, we're a much more civilized society, and we'll do things by protest. I mean, democracy still works. People think that it doesn't, but it does. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Trump, Bolsonaro, and Brexit. The democracies do work. We just have to want them to work. We just have to choose to change. And thankfully, the governments aren't in control of for stopping that. So we don't need an armed revolution, because the governments will go if we just vote against them. But we're just not for some reason. 9. Why do you think there's a noticeable overlap between our side and somewhat the alt-right and being into anime, hentai and weeb shit? There is a noticeable enough trend that Short Fat Taco and Tim Pool covered articles about how liking hentai or anime is code for being alt-right, as the article said. Jeez, I have no idea. I don't know why the liberals and the alt-right both like anime, hentai and weeb shit, because I don't know why anyone likes any of that shit. I think that 2 bombs wasn't enough, so, you know. It's a joke, obviously. I would suggest that this is just a pop culture phenomenon that people are into. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be communist anime, hentai, and weeb shit. You know, I think it's just for whatever reason, the people that are into it, I think, probably come from a diverse range of political persuasions. I don't think it's code for being alt-right either. 10. What are your thoughts on words like Nazi, alt-right, racist, etc. being so overused they've effectively lost their punch? And like Syndrome in The Incredibles, once everyone is this or that, then nobody is. This leading to it seems every group is practicing identity politics and extremism of their identity. Once whites did recently, again, they got called these things. Right, okay, so, I mean, the Nazis weren't white identity politicians. They were German identity politicians. But, I mean, yeah, you're describing the problem with overusing pejorative terms like Nazi and alt-right and racist. When you start calling people who are not obviously not racist and Nazis, blah, 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 then, you devalue the currency of the word, the impact that it has socially, because that's what they're banking on when they use them. When they call you this, what they're relying on is that everyone around you is hostile to Nazis. And if they're not hostile to Nazis, then the word has no impact. And if you've been calling everyone around you a Nazi and can't identify a Nazi using the word, then again, people are not going to act as if they're hostile to Nazis. And yeah, it does kind of open up the door for people who might otherwise be Nazis or in some way connected to these ideologies to be active and have some kind of influence in politics. And so you do fail to lock them out by belligerently trying to lock out everyone that you don't like. So anyway, I hope that helps, Michael, and take it easy, man. Good luck with your work.